And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome to the Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast.
Flibbity-gibbity nonsense.
I thought it was terrific.
It's not just big, it's yeah!
Let's go!
Welcome and thanks for watching and listening to the Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast. I'm Jeff Morey and I'm your host. This week, I'm excited to welcome Lisa Ekman to the show. Lisa brings with her stories of not only her fascinating career and work, but also her red pill awakening and journey from being a lifelong Democrat to exposing the corruption and twisted ideology of the modern day Democratic Party. Lisa is also a committed prepper and owns a farm in Virginia where, along with her partner, Jamie, they have learned how to prep for whatever disasters or doomsday scenarios that threaten our very survival. So Lisa is exactly the kind of guest that is perfect for my show, and I'm looking forward to hearing her story and her insights.
But this is a war. This isn't a battle.
No.
We absolutely will win this war.
It is a war. It is indeed a war. And I have to say, they have won some battles, Jasmine, but we have to keep our eye on the war, and everybody needs to pick up a weapon and get involved, because this is for the safety.
She's nodding
and
along.
lasting
Pick up a weapon.
Hey,
Let me shut down the Senate! We are at war!
We're in a war right now.
We are at war.
So you have to be willing to do whatever is necessary in order to save the country.
And that's why gloves are off.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
And yes, there are many threats to democracy. We see it with these extreme candidates.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
You can only push people so far, and then they start to take matters into their own hands.
What the American public want is for us to bring actual weapons to the smart fight. This is an actual fight.
You know, this is literally call to arms.
With the woke mind virus, if you don't completely do the antibiotic regimen fully, which in this case means eradicating all those parasitic ideas everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Because it took 50 to 100 years for those bad ideas to originally be spawned and flourish in the university ecosystem. So you're not going to get rid of them in a 4-year term with Donald Trump and we never see them again.
Right.
It has to be a continuous cultural war to eradicate those. Now, you'd like to think that it won't take 50 to 100 years to eradicate them, but it's not going to start and end with Trump.
So at this time, I want to welcome Lisa Ekman to the show. Welcome, Lisa, and thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me on to chat.
Before we talk about your journey from the dark side and how it brought you to where you are today, could you first tell us a little bit about your background and your career?
Sure. I was a Democratic advocate and lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for about 20 years. I moved there at the very tail end of the Clinton administration. I worked directly for one of President Clinton's appointees at a federal agency. And I worked primarily on disability policy and advocacy, focused on Social Security, healthcare, employment, and disability rights. And I worked at that agency, got sent from that agency to work in the United States Senate for a few senators, including Ted Kennedy and Tom Harkin, two names most people probably do know. And then also worked for government contractors as well as nonprofits, and did a fair bit of lobbying and advocacy. And so I got to see DC from the inside of pretty much every angle. I also took a few years off and went to law school in the middle of that, and was still working, went full-time but also worked. And while I was in law school, I did an internship at the Court of Federal Claims, which is where if you have a contract with the government and you need to sue them over that contract, that's where that goes. So really saw inside, outside, underbelly, every side of it. And I think I also, at the very tail end of my career before I retired in March, at the end of March of 2020, which we can talk about that later as we talk about my awakening story, I administered a small political action committee for a nonprofit that I worked for. So it gave me the real insight of, we didn't have a lot of money in DC terms, but there's a big difference when you have no money and you have some money. And so I got to see how that kind of works, how access with that works. And I think what is at the root of a lot of our challenges as we the people, citizens, in getting heard by Congress has to do with lobbying and the money and the dark money behind it. And so that's really what my career was. My parents were very liberal hippies. I often say they were hippies who didn't do drugs, which to some people is an oxymoron, but in their case it was true. But they were more JFK Democrats who really respected the Constitution, were patriotic, nothing like a lot of the radical leftists you see today. And so a love of country. I remember in 1976 when we celebrated the bicentennial, everyone was waving a flag. It didn't matter whether you voted for Jimmy Carter, not voted for Jimmy Carter, you were Americans and you had that in common, and we bonded around those commonalities, which today I could hardly think that we would see that same kind of patriotism across the political spectrum. And yet it was really a love of country and a recognition of the great place in the world that the American experiment has. No one has ever had a constitution like we do, founded in our natural born rights, given to us by the Creator, enshrined in our First Amendment, our Second Amendment, and so forth. And so my parents instilled that in me, and I think back then I had a fair bit of skepticism of our law enforcement agencies and especially our intelligence agencies. And I think that has sort of eroded on the left over the years, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But I think all of those things sort of give you, I think, a good sense of where I came from. The other piece I'll throw in there, because we'll talk about this more in my story, is that I spent a good amount of my adult life in school, because I have a bachelor's degree in communications. I also have a master's in social work, as well as a law degree from Georgetown. And so a lot of, I think, what has happened on the left is a direct result of indoctrination in our schools, from kindergarten all the way up. And the longer you spend in school, the more indoctrinated you become. And we can talk more about that too. But so that had a big impact on me in terms of how I evolved or devolved as the party became more radicalized and moved further to the left. So that's sort of the background on my career.
I'd say it's safe to say there's not a whole lot of people that have had more experience and are more qualified to talk about some of these things based on your background. That's pretty impressive. So I'm sure you saw some pretty wild things and some interesting things during your time. Could you describe some of what you witnessed and experienced that ultimately made you leave the Democratic Party?
So, I like to say often, Jeff, that I sort of got to the outside of the inner circle in DC. I think I was not willing to do certain things. And to me, power and money were not the ultimate goal. My ultimate goal was to make our country better, especially for people with disabilities, because that's what I focus most of my advocacy around. And not being persuaded by more money. I got a number of offers to go work as a lobbyist and make a lot more than I made working for the nonprofits, but my clients would completely change, and it would no longer be the American people. It would have been healthcare providers or other special interests. Yep. And there was a lot more money there. So I would have had a lot more money to use to create access and influence. So I only raised that because it did keep me out of some of those situations that, might have been juicier. But I will also say that I saw a lot of people come to DC, elected or working for those elected, who I think who did come to do good and love the country, but they very quickly fell to the lure of power and money. And they often, there would be parties and so much money just thrown to, everybody gets drunk together, and then whatever happens, and all sorts of things like that. And I kind of stayed away from that. But the way I would maybe frame it is that people either got threatened, bribed, blackmailed, or drunk on their own power and lost sight of why they came and what they were doing there. Especially for younger people coming into Congress, there's very likely that they have an internet history that can easily be exploited, and things they might not want the general public to know, or they could be put in compromising positions or offered a lot of money, or the parties, and we'll talk about this more probably, but in my opinion, the parties have just gotten, both of them, way too powerful. The party apparatus, the establishment that controls really our government. The way I look at it now, it's sort of two wings of the same bird, and one gets to flap a little louder, so you look over here and then blame over there. And they kind of take turns. In the meantime, they're robbing our treasury. They're benefiting from insider stock trading. And at the end of the day, we the people are the ones who are left worse off. So I think like I said, I kept myself out of a lot of those back rooms on purpose, because I didn't want to be influenced in the way that you can get influenced or compromised. I worked really hard to keep my reputation clean, because it used to matter back then, at least when I first started working. And so that kind of stuck with me. I wore a suit every day. I had a whole closet full of suits. And even that kind of respect for the institutions and the professionalism disappeared during the time that I was there. I saw some shady things, but nothing like I could really say that would shock anybody anymore. Sadly, with all of like the leaked Sex on the Hill tapes that we've seen and all sorts of things. I mean, I can't say anything that's crazier, or more shocking than that. What I could say is that what kind of might surprise people is that in 2024, $4.6 billion was spent on lobbying in our nation's capital. And that's a lot of money. And that's only the declared lobbying, that there was almost 20 billion spent on the election with all the dark money and everything else. But how does that money get distributed, and what does that mean might be interesting for some people who don't know. So congressperson or a senator will have a lunch, fundraiser, and everybody will pay $1,000 to go sit and eat lunch with that congressperson. And that's perfectly legal. There's not necessarily a quid pro quo, like here's my $1,000, now I get my bill. But what it does is it gets you access. And so if you, want to meet with the congressman, you call the chief of staff, who is the only employee who gets to kind of go across both the policy world and the political world in Congress. So you get the chief of staff's cell phone number, and you get to go in and meet with the congressperson. And there's a better chance that what you want in a bill is going to get into the bill because you have that access. But there will also be, so for example, members might have what they call a leadership PAC, where they raise money for the DNC or the RNC. And you might spend $5,000 and get to spend the weekend with a number of congressmen or senators at a resort and drink wine with them and, spend a lot of time. And that's a relationship building opportunity that your average voter is never going to get, because they're not spending the money to sit down with them. And I think the pervasive influence of money combined with the strength of the parties It is a reason why any person in this country who says, I don't feel like my representative is actually representing me would be 100% right these days in that
100%.
assessment.
Yeah. I mean, I think at this point, let's just be honest here. I mean, we're a uniparty. I mean, they have their little different quirks and things that they talk about, but this is not what our founding fathers envisioned when they wrote the Constitution. Government was supposed to be small. I think they would roll in their graves if they saw where we're at today and just the like the money you talked about. That's, imagine if just a sliver of that money went to help our homeless veterans or disabled, or just so many different things that it could go to. I can't even imagine the things you've seen in your time, just wasted money on Capitol Hill. It's unreal to even think about.
It definitely is. Definitely is.
What are your thoughts on the current leadership for both the Republicans and the Democrats, and where we're at, with now and, going into 2028 election? Like, how do you think that they're doing? And
well, I think you have a difference between the House and the Senate, and there is always that case. I mean, Chuck Schumer, how long has he been around? He's definitely a throwback, not necessarily to a better time, just a different time. And, up until recently, I mean, you have now Senator Thune as the majority leader in the Senate, but up until then you had Mitch McConnell, who would have mini strokes at in the middle of a press conference, and I don't mean to joke at his health, but he would literally freeze and not even.
He just had something on the news the other day.
Yeah, he fell.
I just saw another story, and that's, like you said, that's not the first time. It continues to happen.
Yeah. So, I think that the leadership in the Senate is very out of touch with what's going on in the country, because even and Senator Thune, I would say, is doing a better job trying to be in touch. But again, it's more of protecting the power, protecting the money, and I don't think Senator Schumer is going to be a leader for that much longer, especially because we can talk about this more if you want, but I do think at the end of the day that Democrats are going to own the blame for the shutdown, and it's going to reflect really badly on them. You do see that in the House we have slightly younger folks in the leadership, but I think that so much of it is performative for our benefit that, like you say, it's a uniparty, it's a little bit of difference, and we're not really getting to solve the actual problems that Americans face. Where are the conversations about how we're going to fix this economy? Where, we are going to face a tidal wave of unemployment due to artificial intelligence. Anybody who has any, looking forward sees that. Well, where is the leadership on this? What are we doing to adapt to it? Well, if you want to make us all dependent on the government and you want a universal basic income, it's a great idea to not address the elephant in the room, that pretty much all of the jobs that, everybody who went to college to get are going to disappear. I mean, why are you going to need an accountant when AI can do your taxes in 2 seconds?
ChatGPT will do it for you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Exactly. Doctors are on their way out in many ways. Computer programmers are writing the code that is going to mean the end of their necessity. So, but where is the leadership around that? And, I think the American people, and I think this goes across both left and right, are really tired of us spending so much money trying to democratize the world while people here can't feed their families. So I think, the neocons in both parties are on the way out. And I think that the current leadership is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and that is just distract us, away from, divide us from each other, keep us fighting so we don't reclaim the power that the Constitution gave us so that we can direct our vitriol at them. I mean, Congress continues to have approval ratings in the teens, but an over 90% incumbent reelection rate. And, that is emblematic of a system that is completely broken. Because basically if you're in a district, it's 90% Republican voters. If you win the primary, you're elected. And because of the strength of the parties, which, our founding fathers warned us pretty hard about parties and that factions could be the downfall of our great republic. Look at Federalist Paper number 10, if you want an example, but George Washington said it, Hamilton. So the parties have gotten to the point where we are tribal. We are, if you're on that party, you're bad. And you're, more, if you're on the left, you think all Republicans are morally inferior and that they're bad people and don't care about anybody. And if you're on the right, and you're an establishment Republican, you think similarly about the left. So they're doing their job to keep us fighting each other and dividing us and continuing to make tons of money themselves, which, how does everybody enter Congress broke and leave millionaires? That, right. Insider trading, all of the other things that are going on. But we're so busy fighting each other and trying to figure out how to keep our families fed that we're not holding power to account. I think that, President Trump and MAGA is a deviation and response to that. But I also think that President Trump is an anomaly, and it's a cult of personality. And I don't mean it in this sense, in a cult way. There are MAGA supporters who, no matter what Trump does, they're going to support him because they 100%. Have a cult-like devotion.
Yeah.
And I call what the left is a progressive cult. I think it's on both sides. We have it. It's just a very different thing. But once Trump leaves, I'm not sure what on the right is there, what will happen with that because of that fact. I think coming into the midterms, I was just having a conversation with someone about this recently, and I'm reticent to make any predictions because one of the things that I think has happened with technology, with the 24-hour news cycle, with the sound bites, people have extremely short memories. And something could happen in October next year that completely erases everything right now. I will say that I think the Democratic Party did not learn anything from the 2024 election. They doubled down on all the things people voted against. And they are still failing, besides, socialism and communism, they are failing to provide us with a platform, with their principles. What do they really stand on? They ran on "We're not Trump," and he's going to destroy democracy, which we're not a democracy, obviously. No. You and I would agree on that.
Yeah, we definitely do.
We are a constitutional republic with democratic features, but some very anti-democratic features like the Electoral College designed to prevent the tyranny of the majority, right? Besides the fact that it's laughable that a party who throws a candidate in who doesn't receive a single vote in the primaries as their candidate wants to talk about democracy, at the same time trying to keep a candidate who got all the votes from being in the election because he's a threat to democracy. It is upside down world. It is, it's like from George Orwell's 1984, up is down, war is peace, all of that. But, I think that they need to figure out if they want any chance in the midterms of retaking either houses of Congress, to really tell us how are they solving these, what they call kitchen table issues. What are they doing about unemployment? What are they doing about our economy? What are they doing about how to get food on the table and all those kitchen table, questions. So if the election were held today, I would say probably Republicans keep slim control. But again, a lot will depend, I think, on what happens with the shutdown and how we actually get out of it and how much pain people have to go through with that. And then also, what surprises are in front of us, whether those surprises are organic or they are planned by someone or something to change the conversation and change the election results.
I think as far as the midterms, I've said this multiple times. To me, I don't think there's any key bigger voting point than the economy. And that's just, the middle class runs the country for the most part as far as the voting base. And I'm a 3-time Trump voter myself, but the current economy, the tariffs and everything, it's killing middle class people. And, I'm concerned Republicans are going to bleed come midterms because, they can sugarcoat it however they want and say this or that, but we're not in a great economy right now. I get what Trump's trying to do with the tariffs. I do. I think his heart's in the right place, but I think he's going about it the wrong way. Trump, he's all in 100%. That's all he knows. There is no easing into anything. And I don't know what your thoughts or opinions are on it, but especially with China, because China can match us tit for tat. And that's what Trump, I don't think, understands is you can tariff these third world countries with 100% tariff, but China can match us. I mean, a lot of our industry, our auto workers, all of our production, where do we get our parts from? Where do we get our things from? We get them from China. So, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts or opinions are on that, but I think he's going about it the wrong way. And I'm afraid that Republicans are going to pay for it come midterms. I think there may be a sneaky, the Democrats may sneak out some seats just based off the economy.
Well, I think you have a really good point, Jeff. And again, it's the kitchen table issues. It's the economy, right? But here's a few things I will say. I think that the economy has been way worse than the government has been trying to tell us that it is for a very long time. I think when Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it was well overdue. What they were doing is giving higher numbers originally and revising downward to the point that I believe it was June of 24. They went from a growth of 150,000 jobs to a loss of 20,000. And then went in the revision? And then they're using the first number to say how great the economy is and how many jobs President Biden created. But I think that kind of spinning is all through our economic data. And so I think real people know that we've been in a recession for a long time. Yeah. People are maxing out their credit cards to buy groceries and those kind of things. And unfortunately, I think that the tariffs in the long run might work. I mean, but I do think there might be a lot of pain in the short run. Yeah. And, when Bill Clinton was president and started our globalization, and we started shipping jobs overseas, and we've become an economy that is almost entirely dependent on healthcare and government spending, because you take those out of our economy, our GDP disappears. So how many of the jobs created were government jobs? Are those actual jobs? And as we're seeing in the shutdown, a lot of them don't seem to need to be done, and everything runs just fine. Yeah. So, I think part of it is that, he inherited an economy that was in way worse shape than we were being told. It's really hard to dig us out of the position that we've gotten ourselves into. The amount of spending during COVID, which I recognize was partly under Trump's first watch, but I also think that when he came in the first time, he was undermined at every turn. And
absolutely.
And
he could never put forth his full agenda because he didn't have total power at that point. So
no, he didn't. And I think even he underestimated the deep state, how deep it went, and how many dirty tricks they had up their sleeves. But I think that, so how much money did the Federal Reserve print during COVID, and how much did that debase the value of our dollar? You can't just keep printing money when there's nothing behind that money and expect inflation not to happen. And then you've sent all of our manufacturing overseas. We import almost everything. And so something had to be done to change that balance. And unfortunately, as I talk to people about a variety of different things, how do you get from where we are to where we want to be without pain? And I don't think the answer is you can. And so this is my long way of saying you may be right about the economy and what happens in the midterms. However, I also think there are a lot of other things going on right now that are not painting the Democrats in very good light. And I think those are going to continue to happen. I think that I also think that the Democrats have to come forward with something to show why they're going to be better at the economy. And most
which they haven't been able to do.
They haven't. So, no.
Neither party really honestly has been able to do so.
Well, these are hard conversations, Right. I mean, and I think that we try not to have those hard conversations because a lot of times it requires sacrifice in the short term to create the future for our children that we want. Yeah. And we're not very long-sighted when it comes to politics. We're a very I want it now culture, and so, and a lot of our fellow citizens are very adverse to hard work. And so they want the easy thing that comes really quickly. And so some of them can be very easily persuaded by people who promise things that are completely unrealistic in the short term. And so all of that is to say, I hope you're not right, but I could see the possibility that our economy is still struggling in large part due to trade imbalances. So I hope that's not true. I would, like I said, I predict maybe the Republicans will hold on by a shoestring.
Razor thin, yeah.
I would throw in there, though, also that I am somewhat optimistic that we may actually get an election where only legal votes are counted and all legal votes are counted. And we may see a very different outcome if that's true. I know President Trump is doing what he can to create election integrity. And there are some things coming out right now, I think, about the voting machines and all of that may have an impact. There may be some indictments based on some things that DNI Tulsi Gabbard has said about previous elections. Because I don't think that we have seen accurate results in an election this century.
I agree. 100%. So,
I can't say the extent to which they were inaccurate, but I don't feel uncomfortable to say that there were votes counted that shouldn't have been and votes that weren't counted that should have been in every single election since Bush v. Gore, at least.
Yeah, and to float this on both sides, I don't know if you saw this or not. I didn't look it up too much. I need to research it a little bit more, but I'm pretty sure I saw an article the other day that a Republican PAC or Republican donors bought Dominion voting machines. Did you see something about that? So, I mean, this is going on both sides. Let's not just sugarcoat this here and be like, this is just the Democrats doing it. They're harvesting votes on both sides. I interviewed Tim Burchett a while back, and I asked him about ballot harvesting, and he even said, that's been going on forever. We just got to do it, but we got to do it better than them. It's pretty much what he told me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the ballot harvesting, Jeff, is actually legal, right?
Yeah,
if it's done the proper way, if it's done the legal way. I think there are a lot of things that aren't legal that have been going on as well. And I definitely don't think it's one side, just like gerrymandering is not one side or the other. Yeah. But what I would say is that you do see a lot of places where you would see that the Republican candidate for president won by a certain margin and down ballot is very, very, very different. And not that that automatically means there's something hinky going on, but it is
Still
something
makes you question it.
Yeah, you should question.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too. You know, in 2019, you saw like every Democrat. I could pull up a video montage of like 20 Democrats questioning the voting machines, and you know, talking about Russia changing votes in 2016 or all these things. And then immediately after Biden won in 2020, most secure election ever, no problem with the machines. And, you know, to me, the most important thing is that we as a country have confidence and faith in our institutions and our the most important one, our vote. And to have half of the country questioning it and then basically calling them treasonous because they question it says a lot about your faith in whatever happened, that we can't look into it. Anytime you don't let someone ask questions, I think you're automatically suspect. And I think
Absolutely.
that was true for that.
We've seen recently Marjorie Taylor Greene has been in the news a lot lately. John Fetterman, some of these people that are kind of breaking from both, you know, from their own parties, and that are speaking out about things. You know, Elon Musk floated the idea of an American party. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think that we should have, you know, because I mean, let's just be honest, independence have never really been a major thing. Libertarians, I mean, but what's your thoughts on a third party? You know, we'll say American party. I commented on one of Marjorie Taylor Greene's posts that she liked the other night, and I said, you know, what about a Constitution party? You know what? Because you know, she's been just trashing some of the Republicans lately about some things that are said and done. And Fetterman, you know, that guy, you can't call him a Democrat anymore. I mean, he's got too much common sense to be a Democrat.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think I'm sort of a couple of minds about that. You know, the first thing is, I think, keep any billionaire away from it. Okay. The most important thing, if we have a new party, is that it's completely transparent. And I think one of the things, you know, I have a love-hate relationship with technology. I'm very happy I can be here talking to you. It was a big part of me being able to wake up, and we can talk about that, I know, in a minute. But I also think it's ruining us, you know, in many ways, that we can't connect with each other. A lot of young people can't even have a conversation without a piece of technology in the middle of it. And I also think that it is removing people's ability to think, because they're getting fed so much content constantly. Their brain stops being a content creator and just a receptacle of content. So having said that, it also creates an amazing opportunity for a new party in which everything is crowdsourced with small donations, and where you could literally, when you see people raising $100,000 overnight for things that aren't even nearly as important as this, you know, I think that a new party could create an opportunity to free our politics of the grasp of the parties and of big money donors. In a way that would be really, really helpful. You know, I think part of the challenge is that the Supreme Court decisions in Citizens United, which allows unlimited dark money, basically, in politics, as long as it isn't directly supporting a candidate, can be issue advocacy. I mean, you can give up to $250,000 to each of the party apparatus, you know, in a year. And so... And because the idea from the Supreme Court is that money is equivalent to speech. So you can't abridge our right to speak. And because money gets a message out, then that's speech. So it's challenging within our constitutional framework to eliminate that power, but that comes with the money. But maybe a third party now with a new fundraising apparatus, and one that it is designed to draw in the people who have been disaffected by the establishment, who can admit, hey, I'm mostly left, but I think this idea on the right is a good idea, could really be open to that kind of thing. And I think part of the challenge in what a lot of the independent candidates or old parties was that they are on the extreme ends of the political spectrum. So you have someone who's focused entirely on the environment in the Green Party, or the Libertarian Party, which goes way too far for some people in terms of, their factions that don't believe in borders, or, those kind of things. So, and it's hard. So it's leaving out this 40% that are kind of in the middle, who consider themselves independents and kind of can see across the side and might be willing to compromise on some of those things to ensure, for example, that freedom of speech is protected, and those kind of things that you would think would be something that all of us would agree on, but obviously after what happened during COVID and in recent times is not. So, I don't want to see us in a situation that you have in most European parliaments and, Australia and Canada, where you have 100 parties and you have to form a majority government and all of that. But I do think that it may be time that we heed our founding fathers' warnings about political parties and say, in Federalist Number 10, they said that, a well-running government could control factions. And in fact, that's what they should do, is to try to tamp down this tribalness and division. But it's very clear that that is not what the establishment is doing. And so it might be time to heed the warning that if we don't address this, our republic's going to fall.
Definitely. Big government is and always has been the problem, in my personal opinion. All right, let's talk about your journey. Sure. And talk about your book, Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites. Tell us about it, your thoughts and inspiration behind it, and what readers can expect.
Sure. So I guess I can talk about my awakening because that's really what prompted me to write the book. So, as we talked about, I was a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. I used to say I bled blue, and I would have been one of those vote blue no matter who, in part because, you get the leadership blue, then you get only blue bills and things like that. And if in the opposite, if you have a red leader. So, and I think, COVID had a lot to do with my awakening, but I want to share a quick story from before then that kind of what led me up to why I was able to awaken during COVID. And sadly, it has to do with the fact that I lost both my parents to illness. My dad passed in 2014 and my mom in 2016. And my mom was caring for my dad. He had a surgery in which it just went horribly wrong, and he was functionally quadriplegic, his adrenal glands failed, and all of these things. And my mom, who had multiple sclerosis, was his primary caregiver. And while she was caring for him, she was diagnosed with stage 4 of an extremely aggressive cancer, and was given the Get Your Affairs in Order speech. And my mom decided she was going to have conventional treatment, but she would do anything else that she could do to beat this cancer and stay alive. And so she said to me, will you look into it for me? And I said, sure. And, I'm a researcher. That's part of what I did for a living. And I looked into it, and I found 2 books that were really, really helpful. And we changed everything my mom ate, everything she put in her body, on her body, cleaned in her house. And we worked on all different things about dealing with stress and eliminating trauma and all of the toxicity that comes from that. So my mom had surgery, and then she was in the middle of her first round of 6 chemo treatments. And after the third treatment, she had tests run and she had no evidence of cancer anymore. And so we beat that cancer before they even finished the first treatment. Her doctor was completely, said it's a miracle. I've never seen this happen. This is wonderful. And she had 2 years cancer-free, and we got to take her on trips and all sorts of things. And then she got a tiny growth that showed up in a scan after 2 years. And she had one round of chemo and it fried her kidneys and she died. And the reason I tell this story is that a lot of what I read and learned in my research really undermined my faith in our so-called healthcare system and all of the agencies that are supposedly protecting us and, holding industry to account and all of those things. And it just didn't jive. But I worked with all those agencies in DC. So after my mom died, I went back to work and I sort of had to put all those thoughts about what is the CDC, the FDA, the USDA, what are they really doing? Because I was working with them and all of that. And so now flash forward from 2016 to 2020. I had seen Washington change in a really negative way during the time that I was there. And I used to believe when I first got there and maybe the first decade or so that I could actually make a difference. I thought I was involved in conversations with people who respected each other and were working for the common good and were trying to come to a compromise that might not make everybody happy, but at least was a positive step forward. And that just stopped being the case. And especially, I think, during Obama's second term, you just saw the tribalism starting to come out and people just trying to score points. And it's all politics and not policy. And it's how is this going to look in the next election, not how is this going to affect the American people, And so I was getting tired of it. And so I had scheduled my retirement for March 31st of 2020. I'd done that 6 months before because I wanted to give my organization enough time to find somebody to replace me. And so if you recall when that was right after 2 weeks to flatten the curve at the beginning of COVID. And I was terrified at the beginning of COVID. I will sadly, ashamedly admit that I bought it, 100%. Yeah. Here's oh my God, here it is. We knew it was going to come at some point, and here's this pandemic. So my partner, Jamie, he was my boyfriend at the time, and he wasn't buying it at all. And so actually, your audience will appreciate this. So I wanted to get out of DC because I knew how easy it was to lock DC down. And so we actually bought an RV. And we went and we're staying near his family in West Virginia. So we're in this RV and we're in West Virginia, and he and I are going at it, not physically or anything, but, verbally sparring over whether or not we need to be afraid, whether or not, we need to wear masks and not interact with people. He's always saying to me, well, do your own research. I don't think that's true. Do your own research. Show me your receipts, all of that stuff. I, at the same time, am starting to see natural health practitioners that I started to follow prior to that, based on the research I did with my mom, getting censored. And it started that kicked me back in to remember that in my heart, I'm in a lot of ways a classical liberal, meaning I believe in liberty, and I'm a First Amendment absolutist, and I believe in the Constitution. And when I heard my own government using the term disinformation as it is coming from our citizens, it kind of set up some alarm bells. Now, at the same time, a lot of the advice we were getting about COVID from our so-called health agencies was just silly based on the research that I did for my mom. And, I use this example because it's a really easy one and clear one. And that is, they're telling us we couldn't leave our house and we had to stay inside. The healthiest thing you can do for yourself is get some sun so you can get vitamin D and to keep yourself healthy. So you can't leave your house. You got to stay inside, be alone. Isolation is also extremely bad for your immune system, and fear is, and all of that. And, you know, you got to stay inside and breathe recircled air, and you can't, you know, and then just all of the recommendations were silly. Why does Walmart get to stay open, but the local mom and pop have to close? But this one, I think, was the one that sort of really hit it home for me, was the 6-foot social distancing. Because I started doing research and I couldn't find any science to support it. None.
There isn't any.
And there isn't. And Anthony Fauci has since admitted it, that's true. So at one point, Jamie and I were going at it, and I said to him, I said, Jamie, you know, I just can't believe it. I can't believe these people that I've worked with, the agencies that I worked with, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who I used to work really closely with his staff when he was in Congress. I can't believe they would do this to America, to the world, without any data and evidence. And he looked at me straight in the eyes and he said, Lisa, if they'll poison our water, what won't they do? And my brain stopped, because I could hold a great deal of cognitive dissonance, okay? And I think that's something that's very common among the left, which we can talk about more if you want. My brain could not think its way, even with a great deal of cognitive dissonance, out of that. I mean, water is the most essential thing. You're going to die without it in 3 days if you have no fluids. And so if they'll poison that, what won't they do? And he's like, if you don't believe me, Lisa, prove me wrong. And I think I screamed at him, okay, I will. And then I started doing research, and my mind has never been the same. And my reality shattered. Everything I thought was true, no longer true. Reality disappeared. And I had a lot of soul searching and to do because, you know, there is this belief on the left that they're morally superior, that they know better than everybody else, that they, you know, have a right to tell you what you can and cannot do because they are more educated and know better. And I was just like that. And, you know, the things I thought about people who were on the other side and things I said about people on the other side, I had to, you know, come to peace with that between me and the creator, and then rebuild my own self-image and self-esteem and self-confidence. So that took a couple of years, Jeff. That was a hard process. I think a lot of people would call it the dark night of the soul, where, you know, I was rebuilding and understanding the reality that the delusion of reality I lived in, you know, isn't true. And here's the real reality. And then I said, you know what, I saw the true danger our republic was in as the censorship was growing, as they literally were trying to create a ministry of truth under the Biden administration. And I said, I can't sit here and do nothing. So what can I do? Let me share my story. Let me tell how brainwashed and programmed and indoctrinated I was. Let me talk about how it happened, why the left evolved the way that they did, in the hopes of helping other people wake up who were like me, in the hopes of helping people who want to help people wake them up. And for those people who are already just waking up, know that they're not alone, and that there is light at the end of the darkness that you need to go through to reconcile who you were with what the reality is. And quite frankly, to know that you're not crazy, because when you first wake up, you think you're losing your mind. I'm like, wait a minute, I'll relate the story to you. So I remember one time Jamie put on Tucker Carlson, and I mean, I hated him when I was, you know, in the cult. I was like, man, his voice annoyed me. I thought he was like cocky and didn't know what he was talking about. But he put him on, and I was like, oh my God, everything he's saying makes sense. Did I just have a psychotic break? What's going on? You know, and so you have lost, your reality disappears. And in some ways it is very much like you're having a complete break. And so, you know, in part the book was written to help people who are in that process understand that they aren't losing their mind. They're actually, and the way I frame it in the book is you're reclaiming your mind. You gave your mind up to the indoctrination. And we can talk about how that works in a little bit more detail if you want to. But, you know, if you read the book, what you can expect is a little bit more detail on my background to help you understand who I was, how I saw what happened on the left happen. And it started with political correctness, and it moved on from there. Because once you control the way people get to speak, then you start to control the way they think, and then you get to control their reality. And with the idea of eliminating objective reality until only what the government tells you is true is true. And so the evolution of what happened on the left, and then the tools of control that were used to do that, which are, in my opinion, the education system, or the indoctrination system, as I would call it in our country, and then propaganda and censorship through media and then social media. But media meaning television programming, movies, music, mainstream media, legacy media, you know, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you or your audience about Operation Mockingbird, but I make sure I mention that in every time I talk about this, because for some people with some audiences, it's very instructive. It's very eye-opening about the way in which we've been lied to and manipulated our entire lives, my parents' entire lives, my grandparents' entire lives, probably ever since around the early 1900s. We've really even before that, I'm not sure we know much of what was true, to be honest. But, and then what in particular are the characteristics of people on the left that made them more susceptible to this type of programming and indoctrination? And then finally, how can you wake yourself up, and what, you know, how can you help someone reclaim their mind, begin to think again, and allow themselves to ask questions again that they currently feel afraid to ask. So that's where the book came from, and what motivated me to write it, and what someone could expect if they read the book. You know, the goal here for me, you know, I will appear on most any podcast or talk to any audience, regardless of what their beliefs are. My goal is to get us talking to each other once again, right, in a respectful manner, so that we can begin to see beyond the divide and conquer that the government is pushing at us 24/7, reconnect around the things that we have in common. And for a lot of us, that is our belief in the Constitution, our belief in this country. And so we can reclaim the power that the Constitution and our founding fathers wanted us and the states to have, and get back on track to fulfilling, you know, the vision that this country was founded on.
We're all an American people. And I think if everyone would respect the flag, respect our country, it would change everything for everyone. So let's talk about a little bit about your life since your awakening. You've had some pretty drastic lifestyle changes, I would say.
Yes,
you're joining the Prepper Club. I think it's safe to say you're joining the Prepper Club. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about your life now and what you have seen and witnessed, and how it has made you? I'm not going to, you know, just label you as a prepper, but how it has made you be preparedness minded, and how it's affected your life now.
Sure. So in 2020, after my experience at the RV and my awakening, I decided that I couldn't live in DC anymore. And Jamie and I bought a farm. There were a number of things that go into that. The first was, you know, what I learned about our food supply, and wanting to grow my own food and be in a location where almost everything I eat, I can tell you who grew it, how it was grown, or how it was raised, and what it ate. So I bought a farm with Jamie, and then we also, we, I think in looking at COVID, it became really clear how easy we could be controlled and manipulated through restriction of supply of everything. We had those ridiculous toilet paper shortages, but there's a reason for it. It's because nobody took the time to say, hey, here's all this commercial toilet paper that's supposed to go to bathrooms for office buildings. Let's sell it in the retail market. Nobody thought about that, but we started to see supply chains fall apart. We started to see all of that. I quickly became, much more aware of how dependent I was on the government for most everything. And as we get more technology integrated into our lives, they came around and were installing smart meters in my neighborhood during COVID. And I said, well, why do I want that? Well, you actually don't. And it would make it really easy as part of the Green New Scam, to cut you off. Oh, you're using too much AC. And I began to see the ways in which being dependent on the government puts you and your family at risk for all sorts of nastiness. And so, we bought this farm. We have, solar power here. We have unlimited amount of wood for heating. We have, I've learned a lot of skills as well that, we joke around, like if you were going to be on Survivor, the TV show, would they vote you off the island? And when I moved here, they might have, but they definitely would not now. They would want me there. I can tell you what plants to definitely not eat, and I can tell you a lot of plants you can eat. I can also grow them. I can also process them and save them. And I learned, I actually took a whole summer-long class about herbal medicine. So I know how to grow it. I know how to process it. I know what to use it for. I have not been to the doctor since 2019, and I don't intend to, unless I have some traumatic injury, because I think due to our never-ending war fighting that I would not support, we have learned a lot about how to put broken people back together when they break. But we do a terrible job with any kind of chronic illness or, anything like that. And so I wanted to learn how to take care of myself and my family in these instances. So I think you could call me a prepper. It's not going too far to say, and I also, I'm very concerned about the disappearance of cash. From, our ability to transact with one another without the government being involved, and the ability to shut people's ability to transact off at the press of a button. And we did see this start happening with people being deplatformed from banking. We saw, our lovely neighbor to the north, who I think has fallen further down the authoritarian rabbit hole than we have. We saw, them cut off people's bank accounts because of the trucker convoy and things like that. And so, as people are getting, going all in on Bitcoin and, converting all of their assets to digital-based assets, I made the opposite choice. And I, as much as possible, have everything in hard assets, things I could trade, things I could sell, and things that have intrinsic value that don't rely on fiat currency and don't rely on some external value based on random zeros and ones on a spreadsheet. So I think all of that is to say, a lot of my awakening was that the freedom that I took for granted that I had in my youth has almost completely disappeared in this country. Even in this county that I live in, there is a lot of bureaucratic red tape to do much with my property. And I'll use this as an example because I think it's one of the most ridiculous ones. Like, if I have a farmer neighbor who is a dairy, he is a dairy farmer, and I want to buy raw milk and drink it, the government, or trade him for raw milk and drink it, the government shouldn't have anything to say about that.
Absolutely not.
If it's a risk, if there is a risk, which I actually think that the risk is way bigger with processed milk, and I could talk to you about why that's true, because it also, pasteurization destroys most of the health benefits of the milk. But why should the government have any say in that transaction? And, there'll still be the ability to barter, but when you get rid of cash, it makes those types of person-to-person transactions much more difficult. And so I saw that as coming down the pike too. So, I think a central bank digital currency is a horrible nightmare, leading to a Chinese-like social credit system, which we've already seen some of the deplatforming and all of that. And so it drove me to think, yeah, I really want to have a lot more control over my own assets. I want to have a lot more control over my ability to feed myself and keep myself warm. And, on the one hand, like, I have a technology addiction like everybody else does, Jeff. But I also will not lose my mind if the web goes down. I think a lot of people will. And
100%. Yeah.
I think the cities will be in chaos within 2 days at best, but which is why I didn't want to be in the city. I don't want to be too far from the city because I like some of the amenities you get. There are some good parts of it, but I also don't want to have anything to do with that in the event of some of those types of things. And I don't even know, I haven't seen any coverage, but I don't know if the No Kings have gone bad today.
Yeah. That'll have a lot to do with the midterms too, I think, and how the Dems behave this weekend. So
yeah, and I think one of the things that I do is use a lot of examples in the book of things like of media bias in the way they cover things. And I have my own particular opinions about what happened on January 6th. But if you just compare January 6th to, the Summer of Love, George Floyd riots, there's no comparison in terms of economic damage, lives lost, injuries, businesses destroyed. But the media bias in that is crazy. And, I think that we're going to see, and one of the things that I talk about in the book is that we really are having a cultural revolution towards communism in this country. And that, Mao Zedong had his Red Guards, and they were the youth in the cities creating chaos. And in part to centralize control federally, and over law enforcement and things like that, but also to undermine, city government to give the state more power. And I don't necessarily see what happened with George Floyd and those riots as very different than what happened with the Red Guard. And it was about cultural issues, So, I think that was also part of why I wrote the book, because that's what I saw coming at us. And I think they've done a really good job of misinforming young people about the dangers of communism. And for example, if you ask them what the Bolshevik Revolution was and how many people died in it, they don't even know what it is a lot of the time, and they can tell you all about the horrors of colonialism and capitalism, but they can't tell you anything about what happens when a country decides that they are going to hand all of the power over to a small group of people to distribute resources with equity. So I have a big problem with the term equity. I talk about that a lot in the book because it is essentially the idea that one group of people gets to take from another group of people to make things even, and somebody gets to decide who that is and how it goes. And but anyway.
Right. Well, Lisa, I appreciate you joining me. This book is a phenomenal red pill for a lot of people. Few people have your background and your experience and have lived, to be able to talk about some of these things. So I think it gives you a very unique perspective, and people can really get some great insight into, how they can make their lives better, how they can wake up. So thank you for sharing your story with people. Where can we get your book?
My book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and you can check out more and, see more about me on deprogrammingdemocrats.com.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining me, Lisa. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. I really enjoyed it.
Are you tired of all the arguments that get you absolutely nowhere? My name's Jurgs. With my degree in history and political science and 21 years as a special agent in the U.S. Secret Service, I've lived what other political pundits can only talk about. Join me weekdays, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific, and then again on the podcast for Up the Middle, Politics for the Rest of Us. Daily show is available at www.mastiff.media. The podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening to the Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast. Your source for real news and analysis on politics, prepping, paranormal, conspiracy theories, and the volatile state of the world we live in. Tune in next week and every week for a new episode. And stay safe, stay healthy, and stay vigilant.